Welcome to the Knowledge Stack Podcast. My name is Jason. Thank you for joining me. I'm really excited about this episode. I had an opportunity to sit down with Michael Ogden, the editor-in-chief of the Credit Union Times. This was recorded on Thursday, May 1st. Before we get into the interview with Michael, I wanted to address the Todd Harper interview with Brookings, which actually happened on the same day. I don't believe it was posted until after the interview that Michael and I did together. I've been in the credit union industry for 30 years, and while I don't agree with board member Harper's position on most items, certainly a lot of the things that he talked about during the Brookings interview, we've kind of agreed to disagree on the overdraft protection and some of the things that were mentioned in that interview. We 100% do not agree. I respect his position. I respect his service. I don't necessarily agree that the two board members should have been fired. I certainly have my disagreements with board member Harper. He certainly did not ingratiate himself to a lot of folks that maybe don't hold the same view as he does during his Brookings interview. I was a little disappointed. I would have imagined the focus of that interview would have been more in line with a conversation about the movement and about how the credit union movement kind of exists for the next foreseeable future. I don't know when this current crisis ends, but certainly I think conversations about the response from America's credit unions was valid, and I have the same criticism of some of the trade groups and the lobbying groups and their silence. I suspect that some of their silence is the result of a disagreement between their view and Chairman Harper's or board member Harper's view at the very least. So I think there's a lot that's upcoming. My concern, and where I wish I would have heard more from either America's credit unions or from board member Harper during this interview is either move on and let's get some names nominated so that the credit union movement and the board can reestablish themselves and move forward with whatever the board is going to need to do in the near future. There's a lot of economic uncertainty, and having a board of questionable legality at this time is not very tenable. I'm sure any action that's taken by the reduced board is sure to be challenged in court. So let's do what we can to stabilize the board and move forward. Who knows? By the time I get this edited and posted, there may be some nominees. I highly doubt it. I'm still of the opinion that this is sort of the precursor to regulatory consolidation. So I hope that's not the case, because I think that's a very, very dangerous situation for credit unions and the movement in general. All right. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope you enjoy this interview with Michael Ogden. I hope to have him on again. I think the interview went very well. I have a few other episodes that are coming soon. So with that, here is my interview with Michael Ogden, editor-in-chief of the Credit Union Times. Thanks for watching and listening. Welcome. I'm here with Michael Ogden. He's the editor-in-chief of the Credit Union Times since 2016, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thanks for joining me, Michael.
Of course.
In your bio, you included an interesting piece of trivia that you flew on the Concorde for free. How did that happen?
You really want me to tell it?
I'm curious, yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll tell it. It's fine. This goes back decades ago, a long time ago. My first reporting gig was at a radio station in Columbus, Ohio, 610 WTVN. And there was an opportunity to do a media flight on the Concorde from New York to Columbus. It was some promotion thing. I don't know. I flew out to New York. We were in the Concorde, lounge everybody, all these media people, everybody got hammered. I mean, just absolutely blitzed. And and then they put us on the Concorde to fly back to Columbus, Ohio, all the full weird I'm extremely wealthy service, that you get on that.
Yep.
And we land in Columbus. I mean, it was pretty awesome. I mean, it
Mhm.
takes off.
Yep.
Obviously, this is before it all stopped working.
Yeah.
But we land and we get off like we're the freaking Beatles.
Mhm.
And weirdly, the Beach Boys are playing at the bottom of the stairs as you get off the plane
That is
in
so
this whole
strange.
red carpet. It was so weird. But again, we were all so hammered. I mean, these are TV people,
Uh-huh.
newspaper,
Yep.
radio.
And
It was
newsmen,
funny. Yeah,
from back in the day.
it was fun. I still have the ticket somewhere.
That's great. Yeah, a
It was
little piece
cool.
of trivia.
Yep.
That's neat. We met at the Credit Union
Mm-hmm.
Summit.
Yep.
You were the moderator for two panels, one panel, two panels.
Two. Yeah.
And after the session, I looked you up, and I was very interested in your history because you were a newsman back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Started, and I wanted to talk to you about the change in media over the the last decades.
Sure.
And then all this stuff happened with the NCUA, so I figured let's put a pin in that. We can come back to that, and
Okay.
let's chat about what's going on at the National Credit Union Administration.
Sure.
I guess to recap, I believe it was April 16th
Mm-hmm.
that former Chairman Harper and board member Otsuka were not so politely asked to leave the National Credit Union Administration by the Trump administration.
Correct.
And a whole lot has happened since then. So you want to catch us up on where we're at now?
Sure, I'll try. Yeah, that was, as of this recording, that was just 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the volume of news coming out of the NCUA in this fashion, totally unique.
Mm-hmm.
Where we're at today, as of this recording, the lawsuit was filed 2 days ago by Todd Harper and Tanya Otsuka, and they have the same attorney. That lawsuit has been expedited. As of yesterday, I filed a story about that.
Mm-hmm.
But the chaos that's happening because of this is so unique and so potentially devastating, honestly, when you look at it from an industry perspective. And I think people are having a really hard time grasping just how huge this is.
Mm-hmm.
And we are doing our darndest to stay on top of it, our news team. But I don't know where to answer that question of where we're at, because there are 14 balls in the air with this.
Of course.
If you want to say where we're at with the board, the legal legitimacy of the board is in question.
Sure.
NCUA says through the White House that they're totally legal.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else seems to say, no, you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And America's credit unions, DCUC, they're not saying anything against this. Mm-hmm. They're just saying, we would like to have more board members, please. Right. That's where that stands. The lawsuit, like I said, is moving in an expedited fashion. I'm actually interviewing their attorney in a couple of days. Mm-hmm. And we should know something about the lawsuit by looking at my calendar, May 7th or so, because what is coming to kind of a clash is the May 22nd board meeting that might get canceled because of this
interesting
lawsuit.
Because they just kind of rescheduled and asserted that they're going to have that board meeting, which is interesting.
Sure. Well, and Chairman Hauptman has only led one board meeting since appointed. And they canceled the other one. They've had, before Harper and Otsuka were fired, they had 2 closed door meetings about staff. That's all we know technically about that. So that's the other ball that's in the air, is what's the staffing of the NCUA like? It looks like we will find out next week, but it's probably going to be around 220 people are exiting the NCUA. One person today is our media contact, his last day's today. He let us know. He took the buyout.
And I think the administration was shooting for 75 to 80 people to take the buyout. I think the number was significantly lower, but I think the way that those buyout offers are made, they can't cap them for legal reasons. And I guess a lot of people are seeing the writing on the wall and being proactive and taking advantage of at least some sort of severance and, some sort of negotiation that they have, some option that they have today. So
they were shooting for 18 to 20%.
Yeah.
So this is more like 20%.
That's a big number.
Yeah, it is. And we have heard this includes potentially regional directors have taken it and or a chunk of their staff. So that's kind of my concern, kind of on the fringe. I'm worried about what's happening on the ground.
Sure.
With the NCUA. What happens in DC is just kind of
right.
DC.
Yep. Well, it's interesting, right after the news broke, former Chairman Dollar, shared some of his opinions about, what had happened during his tenure. A little bit different scenario. There was one board member that was, again, terminated, and then one who had a recess appointment lapse. So there is some precedent for a single person board, but I guess the question becomes, at what level is that considered a quorum, and what types of activities are legal and open to challenge? This is certainly going to make its way to the Supreme Court, and I would imagine that there's going to be some sort of a ruling. But it seems like a lot of the rulings to date, there weren't, termination protections offered to the NCUA board. But I've seen a lot of opinions about, the term sort of indicating that 6-year term is kind of a high water mark, where a lot of people believe that's kind of a de facto protection against termination. I'm curious to see if the NCUA or if the Supreme Court actually upholds that, tradition, for lack of a better word.
I have no idea what the Supreme Court might do. I mean, I think, granted, Dennis Dollar, he was very vocal about, this happened. I think that is a precedent to a point. I like you mentioned, this is not the same ball game or field, and using his reasoning. I don't know if you saw this, but in the official statement from NCUA, they used Dennis Dollar's quote in a media article as proof.
Which was
come on,
a little questionable.
Well, and that's another kind of, again, I said there are like 14 balls in the air. That's another one is Hauptman, Chairman Hauptman. So this happened. Harper, Otsuka, gone, fired by email by one of Trump's White House staff members. I forget the gentleman's
name. Not even actually delivered to
no.
Former chairman.
Just emailed at 7 p.m. and 7:01 p.m. But what was my point here? Oh, Hauptman, we were like, okay, God, because we kind of expected Harper, that this would happen.
Sure.
Not both of them. And, she'd only been around a year. But what was interesting was everybody was asking, where's Hauptman? Where is he? A week passed, nothing. And then finally last week, the NCUA put out a statement, and I had to triple check with the NCUA, is this coming from Hauptman? And they said no.
Right.
This is just coming from NCUA. And so I asked, did the White House write this? No response. Never knew who wrote this statement.
Wow.
So the only thing Hauptman has done publicly is we were able to attribute one quote to him, and then he recorded a brief LinkedIn video. And it basically saying what
boilerplate, public servant, appreciate service, and moving on.
So we don't really know what he's doing right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
It is.
On your, your very, very coincidentally timed Shared Accounts podcast, I was listening to it the day before, all of this, sort of came to a head. And it was interesting. You had a chat with Elizabeth Grubian about the potential for lawsuits, and from kind of her perspective, there was a strike against, or a challenge, or a difficulty a little bit with the former chairman as opposed to Otsuka. And I'm kind of surprised to see that their cases were sort of, they brought them together, because I do agree that there's definitely a difference between the two. And I think with everything that happened with the Biden administration and Chairman Harper and the reinstatement and all of those sorts of things, I think you could make a more valid argument that that his termination was legal, or certainly not egregious. Whereas
Sure.
I don't think you can make that case with Tanya Otsuka. So it's an interesting scenario that they've decided to kind of lump them together.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that Harper and Otsuka filed together.
Right.
So Elizabeth, as you pointed out in that podcast we did, we had done a full interview with her that we had to scrap, because everything went to hell really quick. And but we brought her back on to walk through, and she's also a friend of Todd Harper. She worked under him, but she was laying out these interesting legality issues that are underneath all of this, especially for Todd Harper. Tanya Otsuka, not so much. I mean, there's no, we were never given a cause, a fire. Now, we've heard rumors, and I'm not going to say what those might be, but lumping them together, talking to 3 different attorneys, they're kind of split. They're kind of split is what I should say, because they really kind of believe that the Trump administration honestly has a leg up on this.
Right.
Because, Harper and Otsuka have to pay for this themselves. But honestly, somebody may be paying for this. We don't know. There may be an organization help funding this legal effort. We haven't received an answer on that yet. But, the Trump administration can drag this out, but they don't necessarily want to drag it out because there's an ultimate bigger plan, it seems to be in play. And that's the scary part.
Yeah, for sure.
Of this. So,
well, let's talk about that.
Okay.
The feeling that I get is that this is in some way, shape, or form Doge related, and that the idea behind regulatory consolidation is maybe not the entire motivation, but it certainly informs this decision. And I don't think it's a very big leap to go from what's happened over the last 2 weeks to maybe we don't need the 2 regulators regulating financial institutions in this country, and maybe there's one regulator, and at the end of the day, the Federal Reserve or the Office of Thrift Supervision or somebody becomes the mega regulator for all banks and credit unions. And I think that's a dangerous situation, certainly for credit unions who have a very, very different mission than the banks do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the terrifying scenario for the industry. And what is also happening at the same time is the tax issue up on the Hill. But we can talk about that in a minute. As far as this goes, this is really a Doge thing. I mean, I'm on their website every day, multiple times a day, to see if they've listed anything for the NCUA. They have not. They haven't updated the site, I believe, since April 14th.
There was a Tesla earning call the other day. I think Elon's probably busy.
Maybe. Sure. But there is a real contraction happening in DC, especially among the regulators. And this appears, to your point about whittling things down to one regulator, they seem to be, if I had to guess at this, kind of one of the strategies, go after the lowest hanging fruit. Let's try the NCUA first.
Right.
And see if we can dismantle that. If that's fine, great. Let's do FDIC next and then the Federal Reserve. And that's what we fear is playing out. this consolidation of power, and consolidation of regulatory authority, because, like you said, credit unions are so different.
Yeah.
And they behave differently.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different, not only financial setup, but mindset
For sure.
and set of beliefs is totally different.
Absolutely.
And so I do fear that that's where this is really going. And like we had with that interview with Elizabeth, you mentioned, she is, for her and a lot of others, and we're seeing it on our end too, but there does seem to be a direct line you can trace here to what the end game is.
Sure.
And that's where we're really, really surprised at CU Times that the industry is not screaming about this.
Agreed.
And I mean, we know why, but they won't say it on the record.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody is doing that. Nobody is fighting this fight at all. They're just like, well, we'll work with the administration. We'll do what we need to do. Da, da, da. And I'm like, no, this is kind of an emergency.
Yeah.
And you could lose the tax exempt status. That would change your business structure a bit.
For sure.
I don't know exactly what the industry looks like. We have mapped out some of that. With this happening, I mean, I have no idea what that world is.
Well, what's interesting is, we're only, a few months removed from GAC, and that's the huge effort. Everyone goes up to the Hill, and we have our conversations with our regulators, and it's interesting to me that the bulk of the conversation was obviously about protecting the tax status, which it should be, but what I find amazing is the conversation was about we don't want to be caught with all of these representatives trying to find the coins in the cushions, looking for a couple of billion here, a couple of billion there. The bill is in the deep dungeons of the Capitol, and they're negotiating, and hey, we can get 5 billion, 6 billion, 12 billion, whatever the number is from credit unions by eliminating this tax status issue. And for all of the right reasons, we had plenty of talking points about why that's penny wise and pound foolish. And I agree that on paper, yes, there's a couple of $1 billion you're going to save, but in the long run, we generate far more in revenue and income, and all of that is taxable. So that argument aside, the lobbying groups, whether it's the local leagues, the national leagues, we're all about not getting caught up on, being the low man on the totem pole, not being the one with the loud voice, specifically for the tax exemption conversation. But here we are in a situation where, they terminated 2 members of the board. I haven't heard anything about any potential nominees to succeed them. So if we've eliminated board positions, at some point, either we're going to hear names or we're going to hear about consolidation. And the longer we go without hearing names, I have to imagine there's it could be right around the corner. And I think that's the death spiral. I think as soon as we start having conversations about consolidating the regulators, I think the clock ticks. I don't know how many months, years, maybe a decade before that's the end of the tax exempt status.
And that's the difference of that Dennis Dollar situation. There were people coming in,
Correct.
There's nothing. They have not confirmed or denied anybody is on a list or have said obviously anything publicly, or we would have reported it. But our sources are like, we have no idea. And they're on the Hill, they're at NCUA talking to people. The only way the NCUA has been described to us has been, I don't know if I can swear on the show.
You can.
Just that it is a shit show.
Yeah,
is how everybody is describing it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a valid description for just about anything that's happening in the administration today. And this whole shock and awe, this keep them guessing, philosophy is doing way more harm than any potential benefit. And hopefully we're not a casualty of this craziness.
Well, what's interesting, and just so you know, I mean, we haven't even published this report we've been working on. We been gathering Q1 data, just to
Mm-hmm.
give you a heads up, of the top 10 credit unions. The story might come out tomorrow or Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Q1, we had a great Q1,
Mm-hmm.
honestly.
Yep.
And we were very pleased. We had some loan loss provisions and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that,
Sure.
but things are actually looking fine in
Mm-hmm.
Q1. Now, as of again today, I think the trade stuff has hit really hard.
For
You
sure.
know, so we don't know what is going on or what we're going to look like in 3 months.
And the economy for the first time since I believe it was 2021 has actually contracted,
Yep.
which is insane, but completely understandable knowing what has happened over the last
Yeah.
couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So, it's this shock and awe or shock and dumb or whatever. I don't even know what
I
this
don't
is.
know what it is.
Yep.
I mean, it is effective as
Mm-hmm.
far as a strategy
Mm-hmm.
because you keep everybody off their balance.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yep.
can accomplish quite a bit.
Sure. Yep.
And
I don't know if it's things we want accomplished or
I
not,
don't
but
know. Yeah,
somebody
that's
wants it.
not for me to decide. But I just have to hit that nobody is fighting for this publicly
I agree.
or pushing back against the administration publicly.
Mhm.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
We had a really interesting media call with Jim Nussle.
Mm-hmm.
It was all on the record, so I can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a week ago or so, 2 weeks ago. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But
So before the terminations
no,
or
it was
right after?
right after.
Okay.
Because Jim Nussle was on the media call. He's never on the media calls.
Okay.
And we're like, okay, great. Jim's going to be on this.
Mm-hmm.
And we asked, my reporter, Jim Duplessis, asked, hey, Jim, do you think this is executive overreach? And Nussle said no.
Hmm.
And then Jim said, well, why not? He always said that about Biden and everything they did with CFPB and what the White House was doing with executive orders.
Mm-hmm.
And they flat out denied that they ever said it. And we're like, and then this really great reporter, Evan Weinberger with Bloomberg, was on the call. And he was like, I have to step in here. You guys have said that a bunch.
Sure.
And an argument actually
Mm-hmm.
kind of developed between reporters and America's credit unions. Not a mean argument, but just like a factual argument.
Right.
And we have been scouring previous stories, going back years. Bloomberg's been doing the same, and we have found dozens of examples of it.
Absolutely.
And that's where we're at, and that's what we find flabbergasting.
Mm-hmm.
That there is no pushback against this administration.
Absolutely.
Any other one, Biden, Obama, 100% there's pushback. Yep. So what in the hell is going on?
I would be curious to see. I would go back one more administration and see if there was pushback against President Bush.
Sure.
Yeah, I think Trump is just a different animal, and his
absolutely
complete just shoot from the hip. Like, who knows what's going to happen? You may end up in another country in a black bag somewhere. If you're a little bit too loud and you speak up too loud, and you anger Mr. Trump. But what I'm sort of fascinated by is, this is their job. Like, they are the advocates for the movement, and nothing. There was a call yesterday. Yes, I believe it was yesterday.
Yeah, you're right.
And I wasn't able to be on the call, but I got the email about a week ago with, send us your questions that you'd like to address. So I actually flat out sent them the question about, how come we haven't heard anything about, the potential, consolidation of regulators, all of those sorts of things. And I'm waiting for the recording, but I'm sure I'm not going to hear anything on the call addressing any of that on the call yesterday. So
we got a readout of that meeting sent to me this morning, and there was exactly one quote from Nussle saying we would like to have a 3-person board.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's it.
Wow.
So it's all, and I'm not trying to bash America's credit unions here. I'm not trying to bash the Trump administration. I'm trying to figure out what this industry is doing. and these waters are deep and dangerous that we're in
Agreed.
right now.
Agreed.
And I don't like the word unprecedented. I think it's kind of scary. Is what's going on, because what happens to this industry affects every single freaking one of us who work in the industry,
Absolutely.
who belong to the credit unions. I belong to 2 of them. I don't want this industry to die. I'd love it.
Absolutely. I've been doing it for 30 years and I've never seen anything like this. This is definitely uncharted waters.
It is.
Maybe not unprecedented, but it's definitely uncharted. If we don't like that word, uncharted might be a good word to use.
Yeah, I mean, we got really, really used to being an industry not paid attention to.
Correct.
And we would yell about it, hey, you're not paying attention. And then we got some attention and sorry, Dad, I won't do it again. I don't know what this behavior is that's happening.
So let's talk about what's next for the suit.
Okay.
What have you heard? What are the next steps?
For the Harper Otsuka suit, as of yesterday, no, as of this morning, it is on the docket, in the federal docket there in DC. I got confirmation from Wayne, who is just a contact of mine who works with the attorney. Let me look. I'll tell you exactly what he told me just a little bit ago.
Great.
Oh my goodness. Hold on. I have so many emails in here from him. There's no hearing. A hearing has not been set, but there's a briefing schedule, which is on the docket, and I have already read that. So what we are looking at is for a hearing to be set, and we think it's going to be around May 7th or so.
And that's a result of it being expedited because of the upcoming meeting.
The judge in the case, whose name I cannot remember at the time right now, has set it on an expedited journey of sorts. So there's nothing really has been filed in response to the lawsuit from nothing we've seen from the White House, from NCUA, anybody like that.
Okay.
So we're just kind of waiting because the judge wants to expedite it because he knows about the May 22nd board hearing, board meeting. And he doesn't necessarily want it to be canceled, but if the legality of the meeting is in question, he will have it canceled.
Gotcha.
So
I'm curious, I've seen that there was a credit union that was closed down. We saw the big merger out west.
Yeah.
I'm curious if I haven't heard anything, if there's any potential that some of those decisions by the NCUA may get challenged in court. I think that other credit union was in conservatorship, and there's probably nothing there, but I don't know if there's any politics in that very large credit union merger. But if I was on the other side of that approved merger, I might seek maybe relief in the courts for a quote unquote illegal action. I'm curious if you've heard anything about any of that.
We have checked with, I don't know how many, 40 credit unions or so that are in the process of trying to finalize a merger. And we are trying to figure out if this is holding it up, if it's now caused it to be in jeopardy. Nobody is saying a word. I kid you not. And normally we can get credit unions on the phone all the time to talk about anything, nearly. And usually they're all about, oh yeah, this is the process. We're in this. We have no idea where the paperwork sits right now with the NCUA. The NCUA is pretty locked down. You email them. I email them every day, and basically the response I get is the NCUA has no comment.
Wow.
About anything. Do you have any pencils? The NCUA has no comment. I'm kidding. I didn't email that. But we have to believe that this all will have ramifications, butterfly effect, ripple effect, whatever, on the function of this industry with Ent and Wings, that big merger announcement. I know they started that paperwork back in February, so the NCUA absolutely has it all.
Oh yeah.
But
And that was quick. That was a very fast merger,
it
especially
was.
for the size. I mean, you would imagine a merger of that size, there's a lot of complexity. You're talking about two almost $10 billion credit unions, and that $10 billion threshold and all of the things that go along with that, they're
Yeah.
leapfrogging that. And, $20 billion is not an insignificant institution.
Sure. And it's not final. I know they quietly, the two credit unions signed the paperwork around GAC
Mm-hmm.
or right before
Mm-hmm.
to get it to the NCUA
Mm-hmm.
quickly. But I mean, we don't know what the status of that merger is on the
Right.
regulation side. We have to believe everything's going to get held up.
Mm-hmm.
But how held up, we don't know. I mean, think about that. If we never go back to a full board,
Mm-hmm.
how does this function?
Regulation by edict, I
I
suppose.
don't know.
Mhm. Yeah.
Do we just start claiming that we're now a $20 billion credit union? I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. That's very similar to the makeup of the CFPB. You had
Yeah.
a single,
Yeah.
chief that was in charge. I mean, it's the same thing. And how long did that last? 12 years, 14
12
years?
years. Yeah. Can I use that to kind of segue a little bit?
Sure.
And this is my reading on a lot of news that we're reporting, the CFPB.
Yep.
And this is going to lead to the tax exempt issue.
Mhm.
The CFPB appears to be a bigger focus for the administration.
Mhm.
They really want to get rid of that thing.
For sure.
And so does this Congress.
Mhm.
I think that focus, and we saw it yesterday in a hearing, a committee hearing about the tax bill, the House and Ways and Means Committee. They wanted to reduce, what was it, from 12% to 5%, the amount of money they can take out, use of the feds, and they have to
Mhm.
return. It's cutting their budget by billions,
Mhm.
basically.
Right.
And
Kneecapping the agency.
yeah, and so that kind of move, I feel like, guards the credit union tax status a bit.
Okay.
Like, this is a huge fish that they absolutely want dead.
Mm-hmm.
And the credit union tax, I don't know, it's just, for our industry, sure, they're raising their voices up, they're emailing, they're calling, they're sending in form letters. People are even faxing, I found out. Like, what? Anyway, they're doing everything, and that's great.
Yep.
But I just think we're still so small in that pool,
right,
that, they just want the CFPB to go away. And I think in my head, watching the pieces move, that could be beneficial to us.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I saw recently, maybe a day or two ago, Senator Warren actually had questioned some of the movements and, is asking for some hearings about, what actually took place. And, and specifically with the NCUA, not so much with the CFPB. I don't know if they feel like that's that's a corpse at this point, and they've moved on to the NCUA. I haven't heard too much about the Senate or House's respective financial committees say much about anything. But in the last couple of days, I have heard some rumblings about wanting to get to the bottom of the two unfortunate folks that got terminated.
Yeah, Senator Warren and Representative Maxine Waters jointly sent a letter to the NCUA and asking the Inspector General to investigate. I don't know if that Inspector General is going to be there next week.
That's a good point. She probably got a return by messenger.
Yeah, honestly,
no comment.
Yeah, I'm not being snarky.
Yeah.
I'm legit going, I don't know, man. Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth Warren, she does what she can, but she can't get a hearing on anything right now.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Nor can Maxine Waters. And I think the letter was significant, but it's also, I want a letter from America's credit unions.
Yes.
Or DCUC.
Or various leagues, absolutely.
Yeah.
Some of the larger ones, 100%.
That's what will make a difference.
Yep.
We think, but nope,
Nothing. Not a
nothing
peep.
yet.
Mhm. They would just prefer that there are 3 board members, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
3 board members of what? We don't know.
Correct. They're all political appointees,
Right.
a confirmed appoint. I don't know.
Right.
So
I mean,
yeah.
the CFPB was an interesting thing to watch
Mm-hmm.
evolve, and I know credit unions love to hate it. I
Mm-hmm.
always thought of the CFPB for the industry as they were the villain in the soap opera. They just, it's
Yeah.
Victor Newman,
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
hate that guy. And that's how the CFPB always felt,
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
now that that's going away, potentially, we don't know what that is actually going to be. It's effectively toothless.
Exactly.
Which I have a couple of things I want to bring up on that. But I don't know maybe they had this love of hating the CFPB that now they don't know where to target that energy. I don't know.
I found that what happened to the CFPB, I think in some ways was a self-inflicted wound.
Sure.
I think, if they kind of stuck to their mandate and were regulators with some oversight, I think they would have gotten less attention, and they could have still kind of moved the needle. But
Yeah.
when they're regulating by feeling, by not by statute but by feeling like certain fees are junk fees, feeling like certain things are taking advantage of people. Right. I think that's where they ran into some problems. And it's interesting because Chairman Harper, or former Chairman Harper, and I, we had kind of a little bit of a back and forth on LinkedIn. I had a newsletter, and I made some points about the CFPB, and there was a think tank that objected to my position about the way that credit unions assess overdraft fees. I think is markedly different than banks in general. There are bad actors out there, and I'll be the first to admit that. But I think generally, as long as you're not taking advantage of, authorized positive settle negative, restructuring, as long as there's a de minimis, I think there's ways to do it. And we've heard from our members that it is absolutely a lifeline for them. And when we have to turn those things off, they yell at us, and we can only point to the regulators and say, hey, you're going to need to talk to them. But Chairman Harper and I got into a back and forth, and at the end of the day, we both kind of agreed that we both have the same opinion. We're both movement guys. We're both supporters of the credit union movement, and we agreed to disagree on form. And but we agree that there's value in the way that the NCUA regulates credit unions and the way that the CFPB should be regulating financial institutions in general. But there is there's room for that discourse, and we had that conversation, and we agreed to disagree, and we found some common ground, and it was a good conversation. It was interesting because I had I had a lot of interesting profile views from several auditors from the NCUA, some folks from the Federal Reserve Board.
Oh crap!
Freaked out my CEO.
Sure.
Fierce. He sent me a message. He's still on the board, right? So that was an interesting take. But and we've had some back and forth on LinkedIn, and and I and when it happened, I sent a message, and I said, look, I respect your service. I respect that you stood up and you said, hey, I want to serve. And, I have nothing but respect for folks that do that, whether you're, in government, military, you're serving a greater purpose. You're serving something that I've been, involved with for 30 years. So, my hat's off to both of them. But it's sad that there is no civil discourse anymore. You can't have a conversation with people, even if you disagree. It's, we've gotten to this tribalism, we've gotten to this polarization, and it's sad we've gotten to that point. You used to be able to disagree with somebody. Now you can't, because, the people that are in your tribe are going to yell at you and kick you out. And then you're stuck. Yeah.
Including my uncle. But we won't talk about him.
We all have an uncle. We all have that same uncle.
You pointed out the junk fee thing.
Yeah.
I do believe that was the turning point of the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
For the CFPB. It was a branding misstep by the Democrats.
Yeah.
to like, no, we need to not call this overdraft and NSF. Let's call it junk fees, and it backfired big,
Agreed.
and it pissed off way too many people, and they never tried to backtrack on that. Which again, from our perspective, reporting on everything, it was again interesting to watch. Like, oh well, they screwed that up.
Yeah.
Well, and they never tried to fix it.
What's insane to me too is the Democrats have a constituent, and their constituent are the ones that for better or worse use this service.
Yeah.
So if you eliminate that service, all you're going to do is push them to payday lenders. You're going to push them to cash money services. You're going to push them to the lesser of two evils, if you want to consider the overdraft, product an evil. But they are unregulated. They are public institution or public companies that are all about the bottom line. They're going to fee. And ultimately it's their constituents that are going to get the most hurt by a lot of these. You're going to hear a lot of feel-good stories. And again, I 100% admit there are, even in the credit union industry, bad actors, and they're, doing it in a way that is inappropriate. And I think that's where well-defined regulation that says APSN is off the board, you can't restructure, you have to post as presented, all of those things. I think if they put in the regulation and made it, gave it some teeth, I think that's it. If that's as far as they went, then I think everyone would be happy in that situation, because the members would be getting what they need in order to make their paycheck, make their next paycheck. But that ship has sailed, and it's, there's five people at the CFPB right now that are, listening to the podcast, and they're the only ones left.
Nobody's listening at this. Nobody's listening to CFPB. Can I, two big things we are watching for, just to, I'm kind of blowing our cover if any other reporters are listening or whatever. We are waiting for, because it's already started happening. We're waiting to see if the CFPB will cancel that fine against Navy Federal and ViStar that they announced back in November, and I believe it was Halloween, against ViStar. Because just last week, I think it was last week, my God, they canceled that giant fine against Wells Fargo. And did you see what happened right before they announced that?
No.
Wells Fargo donated $1 million to the Trump campaign.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if they bought Dogecoin or, Trump coin.
I have no idea. So we're keeping that legit. I mean, that's what they did. And we're like, this would be the biggest financial story of the year, potentially 2-3 years ago. We're waiting to see if one of those credit unions happens to donate something.
Well, and Navy Fed was the fair credit reporting issue, and ViStar was the
screwed up rollout of their
digital banking platform. That their executive team was somewhere else at the time. They were not where they were.
He was on vacation.
Yes, yes.
What a time. So anyway, those are two big things from the CFPB's perspective that we are keeping an eye on.
I mean, at the very least, I wouldn't be surprised if ViStar and Navy Fed just challenge it, and who's left at the CFPB to defend it? I mean, they wouldn't even have the budget to do it. So
100%. I did check today because I thought, well, maybe if I bring this up, and nothing's been filed, so it's all quiet.
It's follow the money. Yep, Mr. Carville. It's the economy, stupid. It's the money, stupid. The same thing.
Right.
That's crazy. We live in interesting times.
Absolutely.
Well, Michael, I don't really have anything else. This was awesome. I absolutely appreciate it. This was this was my first, I don't know if I'll call it a scoop, but you're my first big time guest. I've,
oh God. Okay.
Professor or two. I've had, a couple of former coworkers, and and actually the summit out in Chicago is yielding some additional fruit. So
wonderful. It was so nice out. I really enjoyed.
I love that format. That's, and it's, over time it's going to grow, and you'll probably have less opportunity for that format. A small, summit really is made better by that type of interaction. But
Agree.
if you've got 500, 600, 1,000, 1,500 people, it's kind of hard to have a bunch of people sitting around a table chatting. It's just going to be a lot of noise. But I definitely I think they did a great job putting that together.
I agree. It was really nice meeting you and all the people down there, and I've actually had 2 or 3 really good contacts come out of that, including yourself.
Great.
And not for work, not for reporting purposes, but purely, I liked you.
I like you too, Michael.
Oh, thanks, Jason. But no, I appreciate you having me on. And if I am a scoop and a get, it's going to get better.
All right.
I promise, for more guests.
I got to tell you, the first few have been, just recording them and going through the editing process. It's cringy. I had to stop. I think it was my 3rd recording. I had to stop it midway through and add an apology disclaimer to all of the listener viewers, which is probably 10 or 15.
Sure.
And just let them know, I'm sorry. I did a lot of and and all of these interstitial things. And, I've been sitting on my arms because I'm a hand talker and I do that a lot. I noticed that on the 3rd video. So
that's
a little bit of time.
You know what? Here's what happens in my experience with podcasts. I've launched, I don't know, 15, 20 of them or something over the years. It just eventually becomes who you are.
Sure.
And meaning you just let yourself be you, man.
Absolutely. It's a conversation.
Yeah, that's it. And then that's when you get a real, like, I'm in it now, man. It just all feels good. But no, Jason, I love that I met you, and I'm really thrilled that you have me on today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for doing it. And
of course,
if I may reach out in the future if anything else crazy happens and try and get a scoop. But stay in touch for sure.
That'll be tomorrow, probably. Who knows, man? Yeah, I'll be here if you need something.
Good luck. Strap in, and I appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jason.
Take care.